29. The door of the lighted bathroom stood ajar. In addition to that, a skeleton glow came through the Venetian blind from the outside arc lights. These intercrossed rays penetrated the darkness of the bedroom and revealed the following situation. Clothed in one of her old nightgowns, my Lolita lay on her side with her back to me, in the middle of the bed. Her lightly veiled body and bare limbs formed a Z. She had put both pillows under her dark tousled head, a band of pale light crossed her top vertebrae. I seemed to have shed my clothes and slipped into pajamas with the kind of fantastic instantaneousness which is implied when in a cinematographic scene the process of changing is cut, and I had already placed my knee on the edge of the bed when Lolita turned her head and stared at me through the striped shadows. Now this was something the intruder had not expected. The whole pill spiel, a rather sordid affair, entre nous soit dit, had for object a fastness of sleep that a whole regiment would not have disturbed, and here she was staring at me, and thickly calling me Barbara. Barbara, wearing my pajamas which were much too tight for her, remained poised motionless over the little sleep talker. Softly, with a hopeless sigh, Dolly turned away, resuming her initial position. For at least 2 minutes I waited unstrained on the brink, like that tailor with his homemade parachute 40 years ago when about to jump from the Eiffel Tower. Her faint breathing had the rhythm of sleep. Finally I heaved myself onto my narrow margin of bed, stealthily pulled at the odds and ends of sheets piled up to the south of my stone-cold heels, and Lolita lifted her head and gaped at me. As I learned later from a helpful pharmaceutist, the purple pill did not even belong to the big and noble family of barbiturates, and though it might have induced sleep in an erotic who believed it to be a potent drug, it was too mild a sedative to affect for any length of time a wary, albeit weary, nymphette. Whether the Ramsdale doctor was a charlatan or a shrewd old rogue, does not, and did not, really matter. What mattered, was that I had been deceived. When Lolita opened her eyes again, I realized that whether or not the drug might work later in the night, the security I had relied upon was a sham one. Slowly her head turned away and dropped onto her unfair amount of pillow. I lay quite still on my brink, peering at her rumpled hair, at the glimmer of nymphette flesh, where half a haunch and half a shoulder dimly showed, and trying to gauge the depth of her sleep by the rate of her respiration. Some time passed, nothing changed, and I decided I might risk getting a little closer to that lovely and maddening glimmer. But hardly had I moved into its warm pearls than her breathing was suspended, and I had the odious feeling that little Dolores was wide awake and would explode in screams if I touched her with any part of my wretchedness. Please, reader, no matter your exasperation with the tender-hearted, morbidly sensitive, infinitely circumspect hero of my book, do not skip these essential pages. Imagine me. I shall not exist if you do not imagine me. Try to discern the doe in me, trembling in the forest of my own iniquity. Let's even smile a little. After all, there is no harm in smiling. For instance, I almost wrote for instance, I had no place to rest my head, and a fit of heartburn, they call those fries French, grandeur, was added to my discomfort. She was again fast asleep, my nymphette, but still I did not dare to launch upon my enchanted voyage. La petite dormeuse sous la menthe ridicule. Tomorrow I would stuff her with those earlier pills that had so thoroughly numbed her mummy. In the glove compartment or in the Gladstone bag? Should I wait a solid hour and then creep up again? The science of nympholepsy is a precise science. Actual contact would do it in 1 second flat. An interspace of a millimeter would do it in 10. Let us wait. There is nothing louder than an American hotel. And, mind you, this was supposed to be a quiet, cozy, old-fashioned, homey place, gracious living and all that stuff. The clatter of the elevator's gate some 20 yards northeast of my head but as clearly perceived as if it were inside my left temple alternated with the banging and booming of the machine's various evolutions and lasted well beyond midnight. Every now and then, immediately east of my left ear, always assuming I lay on my back, not daring to direct my viler side toward the nebulous haunch of my bedmate, the corridor would brim with cheerful, resonant and inept exclamations ending in a volley of good nights. When that stopped, A toilet immediately north of my cerebellum took over. It was a manly, energetic, deep-throated toilet, and it was used many times. Its gurgle and gush and long afterflow shook the wall behind me. Then someone in a southern direction was extravagantly sick, almost coughing out his life with his liquor, and his toilet descended like a veritable Niagara, immediately beyond our bathroom. And when finally all the waterfalls had stopped, and the enchanted hunters were sound asleep, the avenue under the window of my insomnia, to the west of my wake stayed, eminently residential, dignified alley of huge trees degenerated into the despicable haunt of gigantic trucks roaring through the wet and windy night. And less than 6 inches from me and my burning life, was nebulous Lolita. After a long stirless vigil, my tentacles moved towards her again, and this time the creak of the mattress did not awake her. I managed to bring my ravenous bulk so close to her that I felt the aura of her bare shoulder like a warm breath upon my cheek. And then, she sat up, gasped, muttered with insane rapidity something about boats, tugged at the sheets and lapsed back into her rich, dark, young unconsciousness. As she tossed, within that abundant flow of sleep, recently auburn, at present lunar, her arm struck me across the face. For a second I held her. She freed herself from the shadow of my embrace, doing this not consciously, not violently, not with any personal distaste, but with the neutral plaintive murmur of a child demanding its natural rest. And again the situation remained the same, Lolita with her curved spine to Humbert, Humbert resting his head on his hand and burning with desire and dyspepsia. The latter necessitated a trip to the bathroom for a draught of water, which is the best medicine I know in my case, except perhaps milk with radishes, and when I re-entered the strange pale striped fastness where Lolita's old and new clothes reclined in various attitudes of enchantment on pieces of furniture that seemed vaguely afloat, my impossible daughter sat up and in clear tones demanded a drink, too. She took the resilient and cold paper cup in her shadowy hand and gulped down its contents gratefully, her long eyelashes pointing cupward, and then, with an infantile gesture that carried more charm than any carnal caress, little Lolita wiped her lips against my shoulder. She fell back on her pillow, I had subtracted mine while she drank, and was instantly asleep again. I had not dared offer her a second helping of the drug, and had not abandoned hope that the first might still consolidate her sleep. I started to move toward her, ready for any disappointment, knowing I had better wait but incapable of waiting. My pillow smelled of her hair. I moved toward my glimmering darling, stopping or retreating every time I thought she stirred or was about to stir. A breeze from Wonderland had begun to affect my thoughts, and now they seemed couched in italics, as if the surface reflecting them were wrinkled by the phantasm of that breeze. Time and again my consciousness folded the wrong way, my shuffling body entered the sphere of sleep, shuffled out again, and once or twice I caught myself drifting into a melancholy snore. Mists of tenderness enfolded mountains of longing. Now and then it seemed to me that the enchanted prey was about to meet halfway the enchanted hunter, that her haunt was working its way toward me under the soft sand of a remote and fabulous beach, and then her dimpled dimness would stir, and I would know she was farther away from me than ever. If I dwell at some length on the tremors and groupings of that distant night, it is because I insist upon proving that I am not, and never was, and never could have been, a brutal scoundrel. The gentle and dreamy regions through which I crept were the patrimonies of poets, not crime's prowling ground. Had I reached my goal, my ecstasy would have been all softness, a case of internal combustion of which she would hardly have felt the heat, even if she were wide awake. But I still hoped she might gradually be engulfed in a completeness of stupor that would allow me to taste more than a glimmer of her. And so, in between tentative approximations, with a confusion of perception metamorphosing her into eye spots of moonlight or a fluffy flowering bush, I would dream I regained consciousness, dream I lay in wait. In the first ante-meridian hours there was a lull in the restless hotel night. Then around 4 the corridor toilet cascaded and its door banged. A little after 5 a reverberating monologue began to arrive, in several installments, from some courtyard or parking place. It was not really a monologue, since the speaker stopped every few seconds to listen, presumably, to another fellow, but that other voice did not reach me, and so no real meaning could be derived from the part heard. Its matter-of-fact intonations, however, helped to bring in the dawn, and the room was already suffused with lilac gray, when several industrious toilets went to work, one after the other, and the clattering and whining elevator began to rise and take down early risers and downers, and for some minutes I miserably dozed, and Charlotte was a mermaid in a greenish tank, and somewhere in the passage Dr. Boyd said good morning to you in a fruity voice, and birds were busy in the trees, and then Lolita yawned. Frigid gentlewomen of the jury. I had thought that months, perhaps years, would elapse before I dared to reveal myself to Dolores Haze, but by 6 she was wide awake, and by 6:15 we were technically lovers. I am going to tell you something very strange, it was she who seduced me. Upon hearing her first morning yawn, I feigned handsome-profiled sleep. I just did not know what to do. Would she be shocked at finding me by her side, and not in some spare bed? Would she collect her clothes and lock herself up in the bathroom? Would she demand to be taken at once to Ramsdale to her mother's bedside back to camp? But Milo was a sportive lassie. I felt her eyes on me, and when she uttered at last that beloved chortling note of hers, I knew her eyes had been laughing. She rolled over to my side, and her warm brown hair came against my collarbone. I gave a mediocre imitation of waking up. We lay quietly. I gently caressed her hair, and we gently kissed. Her kiss, to my delirious embarrassment, had some rather comical refinements of flutter and probe which made me conclude she had been coached at an early age by a little lesbian. No Charlie boy could have taught her that. As if to see whether I had my fill and learned the lesson, she drew away and surveyed me. Her cheekbones were flushed, her full underlip glistened, my dissolution was near. All at once, with a burst of rough glee, the sign of the nymphette, she put her mouth to my ear, but for quite a while my mind could not separate into words the hot thunder of her whisper, and she laughed, and brushed the hair off her face, and tried again, and gradually the odd sense of living in a brand new, mad new dream world, where everything was permissible, came over me as I realized what she was suggesting. I answered I did not know what game she and Charlie had played. You mean you have never? Her features twisted into a stare of disgusted incredulity. You have never? She started again. I took time out by nuzzling her a little. Lay off, will you, she said with a twangy whine, hastily removing her brown shoulder from my lips. It was very curious the way she considered and kept doing so for a long time, all caresses except kisses on the mouth or the stark act of love, either romantic slush or abnormal. You mean, she persisted, now kneeling above me, you never did it when you were a kid? Never, I answered quite truthfully. Okay, said Lolita, here is where we start. However, I shall not bore my learned readers with a detailed account of Lolita's presumption. Suffice it to say that not a trace of modesty did I perceive in this beautiful, hardly formed young girl whom modern coeducation, juvenile mores, the campfire racket and so forth had utterly and hopelessly depraved. She saw the stark act merely as part of a youngster's furtive world, unknown to adults. What adults did for purposes of procreation was no business of hers. My life was handled by little Lo in an energetic, matter-of-fact manner, as if it were an insensate gadget unconnected with me. While eager to impress me with the world of tough kids, she was not quite prepared for certain discrepancies between a kid's life and mine. Pride alone prevented her from giving up, for, in my strange predicament, I feigned supreme stupidity and had her have her way at least while I could still bear it. But really these are irrelevant matters. I am not concerned with so-called sex at all. Anybody can imagine those elements of animality. A greater endeavor lures me on, to fix once for all the perilous magic of nymphets. 30. I have to tread carefully. I have to speak in a whisper. Oh, you, veteran crime reporter, you grave old usher, you once popular policeman, now in solitary confinement after gracing that school crossing for years, you wretched emeritus read to by a boy. It would never do, would it, To have you fellows fall madly in love with my Lolita. Had I been a painter, had the management of the Enchanted Hunters lost its mind one summer day and commissioned me to redecorate their dining room with murals of my own making, this is what I might have thought up. Let me list some fragments. There would have been a lake. There would have been an arbor in flame flower. There would have been nature studies, a tiger pursuing a bird of paradise, a choking snake sheathing whole the flayed trunk of a shoat. There would have been a sultan, his face expressing great agony, belied, as it were, by his molding caress, helping a Callipygian slave child to climb a column of onyx. There would have been those luminous globules of gonadal glow that travel up the opalescent sides of jukeboxes. There would have been all kinds of camp activities on the part of the intermediate group, canoeing, caranting, combing curls in the lakeside sun. There would have been poplars, apples, a suburban Sunday. There would have been a fire opal dissolving within a ripple-ringed pool, a last throb, a last dab of color, stinging red, smearing pink, a sigh, a wincing child. 31. I am trying to describe these things not to relive them in my present boundless misery, but to sort out the portion of hell and the portion of heaven in that strange, awful, maddening world nymphet love. The beastly and beautiful merged at one point, and it is that borderline I would like to fix, and I feel I fail to do so utterly. Why? The stipulation of the Roman law, according to which a girl may marry at 12, was adopted by the Church, and is still preserved, rather tacitly, in some of the United States. And 15 is lawful everywhere. There is nothing wrong, say both hemispheres, when a brute of 40, blessed by the local priest and bloated with drink, sheds his sweat-drenched finery and thrusts himself up to the hilt into his youthful bride. In such stimulating temperate climates, says an old magazine in this prison library, as St. Louis, Chicago, and Cincinnati, girls mature about the end of their 12th year. Dolores Haze was born less than 300 miles from stimulating Cincinnati. I have but followed nature. I am nature's faithful hound. Why then this horror that I cannot shake off? Did I deprive her of her flower? Sensitive gentlewomen of the jury, I was not even her first lover. 32. She told me the way she had been debauched. We ate flavorless mealy bananas, bruised peaches and very palatable potato chips, and Di Klein told me everything. Her voluble but disjointed account was accompanied by many a droll. As I think I have already observed, I especially remember one wry face on a nuck basis, jelly mouth distended sideways and eyes rolled up in a routine blend of comic disgust, resignation and tolerance for young frailty. Her astounding tale started with an introductory mention of her tent mate of the previous summer, at another camp, a very select one as she put it. That tent mate, quite a derelict character, half crazy, but a swell kid, instructed her in various manipulations. At first, Loyal Lo refused to tell me her name. Was it Grace Angel? I asked. She shook her head. No, it wasn't. It was the daughter of the big shot. Was it perhaps Rose Carmen? No, of course not. Her father was it, then, Agnes Sheridan perchance? She swallowed and shook her head and then did a double take. Say, how come you know all those kids? I explained. Well, she said. They are pretty bad, some of that school bunch, but not that bad. If you have to know, her name was Elizabeth Talbot, she goes now to a swanky private school, her father is an executive. I recalled with a funny pang the frequency with which poor Charlotte used to introduce into party chat such elegant tidbits as when my daughter was out hiking last year with the Talbot girl. I wanted to know if either mother learned of those sapphic diversions. Gosh no, exhaled Limplo mimicking dread and relief, pressing a falsely fluttering hand to her chest. I was more interested, however, in heterosexual experience. She had entered the 6th grade at 11, soon after moving to Ramsdale from the Middle West. What did she mean by pretty bad? Well, the Miranda twins had shared the same bed for years, and Donald Scott, who was the dumbest boy in the school, had done it with Hazel Smith in his uncle's garage, and Kenneth Knight, who was the brightest, used to exhibit himself wherever and whenever he had a chance, and let us switch to Camp Q, I said. And presently I got the whole story. Barbara Burke, a sturdy blonde, 2 years older than Lo and by far the camp's best swimmer, had a very special canoe which she shared with Lo because I was the only other girl who could make Willow Island, some swimming test, I imagine. Through July, every morning reader, every blessed morning Barbara and Lo would be helped to carry the boat to Onyx or Eric's, 2 small lakes in the wood, by Charlie Holmes, the camp mistress' son, aged 13 and the only human male for a couple of miles around, excepting an old meek stone-deaf handyman, and a farmer in an old Ford who sometimes sold the campers eggs as farmers will. Every morning, oh my reader, the 3 children would take a short cut through the beautiful innocent forest brimming with all the emblems of youth, dew, bird songs, and at one point, among the luxuriant undergrowth, Lo would be left as sentinel, while Barbara and the boy copulated behind a bush. At first, Lo had refused to try what it was like, but curiosity and camaraderie prevailed, and soon she and Barbara were doing it by turns with the silent, coarse and surly but indefatigable Charlie, who had as much sex appeal as a raw carrot but sported a fascinating collection of contraceptives which he used to fish out of a third nearby lake, a considerably larger and more populous one, called Lake Climax, after the booming young factory town of that name. Although conceding it was sort of fun and fine for the complexion, Lolita, I am glad to say, held Charlie's mind and manners in the greatest contempt. Nor had her temperament been roused by that filthy fiend. In fact, I think he had rather stunned it, despite the fun. By that time it was close to 10. With the ebb of lust, a nation's sense of awfulness, abetted by the realistic drabness of a grey neuralgic day, crept over me and hummed within my temples. Brown, naked, frail Lo, her narrow white buttocks to me, her sulky face to a door mirror, stood, arms akimbo, feet, in new slippers with pussy fur tops, wide apart, and through a fore-changing lock tritely mugged at herself in the glass. From the corridor came the cooing voices of colored maids at work, and presently there was a mild attempt to open the door of our room. I had Lo go to the bathroom and take a much-needed soap shower. The bed was a frightful mess with overtones of potato chips. She tried on a 2-piece navy wool, then a sleeveless blouse with a swirly clathrate skirt, but the first was too tight and the second too ample, and when I begged her to hurry up, the situation was beginning to frighten me. Lo viciously sent those nice presents of mine hurtling into a corner, and put on yesterday's dress. When she was ready at last, I gave her a lovely new purse of simulated calf, in which I had slipped quite a few pennies and 2 mint-bright dimes, and told her to buy herself a magazine in the lobby. "I'll be down in a minute," I said. And if I were you, my dear, I would not talk to strangers. Except for my poor little gifts, there was not much to pack, but I was forced to devote a dangerous amount of time. Was she up to something downstairs? To arranging the bed in such a way as to suggest the abandoned nest of a restless father and his tomboy daughter, instead of an ex-convict's saturnalia with a couple of fat old whores. Then I finished dressing and had the hoary bellboy come up for the bags. Everything was fine. There, in the lobby, she sat, deep in an overstuffed blood-red armchair, deep in a lurid movie magazine. A fellow of my age in tweeds, the genre of the place had changed overnight to a spurious country squire atmosphere, was staring at my Lolita over his dead cigar and stale newspaper. She wore her professional white socks and saddle Oxfords, and that bright print frock with the square throat. A splash of jaded lamplight brought out the golden down on her warm brown limbs. There she sat, her legs carelessly high-crossed, and her pale eyes skimming along the lines with every now and then a blink. Bill's wife had worshipped him from afar long before they ever met. In fact, she used to secretly admire the famous young actor as he ate sundaes in Schwabs drugstore. Nothing could have been more childish than her snubbed nose, freckled face or the purplish spot on her naked neck where a fairy tale vampire had feasted, or the unconscious movement of her tongue exploring a touch of rosy rash around her swollen lips. Nothing could be more harmless than to read about Jill, an energetic starlet who made her own clothes and was a student of serious literature. Nothing could be more innocent than the part in that glossy brown hair with that silky sheen on the temple. Nothing could be more naive, but what sickening envy the lecherous fellow, whoever he was. Come to think of it, he resembled a little my Swiss uncle Gustav, also a great admirer of Lady Cuvert, would have experienced had he known that every nerve in me was still anointed and ringed with the feel of her body, the body of some immortal demon disguised as a female child. Was Pink Pig Mr. Swoon absolutely sure my wife had not telephoned? He was. If she did, would he tell her we had gone on to Aunt Claire's place? He would, indeedy. I settled the bill and roused Lo from her chair. She read to the car. Still reading, she was driven to a so-called coffee shop a few blocks south. Oh, she ate all right. She even laid aside her magazine to eat, but a queer dullness had replaced her usual cheerfulness. I knew little Lo could be very nasty, so I braced myself and grinned, and waited for a squall. I was unbathed, unshaven, and had had no bowel movement. My nerves were age-angle. I did not like the way my little mistress shrugged her shoulders and distended her nostrils when I attempted casual small talk. Had Phyllis been in the know before she joined her parents in Maine? I asked with a smile. Look, said Lo, making a weeping grimace, let us get off the subject. I then tried, also unsuccessfully, no matter how I smacked my lips, to interest her in the road map. Our destination was, let me remind my patient reader whose meek temper Lo ought to have copied, the gay town of Leppingville, somewhere near a hypothetical hospital. That destination was in itself a perfectly arbitrary one, as, alas, so many were to be, and I shook in my shoes as I wondered how to keep the whole arrangement plausible, and what other plausible objectives to invent after we had taken in all the movies in Leppingville. More and more uncomfortable did Humbert feel. It was something quite special, that feeling, an oppressive, hideous constraint, as if I were sitting with the small ghost of somebody I had just killed. As she was in the act of getting back into the car, an expression of pain flitted across Lo's face. It flitted again, more meaningfully, as she settled down beside me. No doubt, she reproduced it that second time for my benefit. Foolishly, I asked her what was the matter. Nothing, you brute, she replied. You what? I asked. She was silent. Leaving Bryceland. Loquacious Lo was silent. Cold spiders of panic crawled down my back. This was an orphan. This was a lone child, an absolute waif, with whom a heavy-limbed, foul-smelling adult had had strenuous intercourse 3 times that very morning. Whether or not the realization of a lifelong dream had surpassed all expectation, it had, in a sense, overshot its mark and plunged into a nightmare. I had been careless, stupid, and ignoble. And let me be quite frank, somewhere at the bottom of that dark turmoil I felt the writhing of desire again, so monstrous was my appetite for that miserable nymphette. Mingled with the pangs of guilt was the agonizing thought that her mood might prevent me from making love to her again as soon as I found a nice country road where to park in peace. In other words, poor Humbert Humbert was dreadfully unhappy, and while steadily and inanely driving toward Leppingville, he kept racking his brains for some quip, under the bright wing of which he might dare turn to his seatmate. It was she, however, who broke the silence. Oh, a squashed squirrel, she said. What a shame. Yes, isn't it? Eager, hopeful hum. Let us stop at the next gas station, Lo continued. I want to go to the washroom. We shall stop wherever you want, I said. And then, as a lovely, lonely, supercilious grove, oaks, I thought, American trees at that stage were beyond me, started to echo greenly the rush of our car. A red and ferny road on our right turned its head before slanting into the woodland, and I suggested we might perhaps drive on. Milo cried shrilly. Righto. Take it easy. Down, poor beast, down. I glanced at her. Thank God, the child was smiling. You chump, she said, sweetly smiling at me. You revolting creature. I was a daisy fresh girl, And look what you've done to me. I ought to call the police and tell them you raped me. Oh, you dirty, dirty old man. Was she just joking? An ominous hysterical note rang through her silly words. Presently, making a sizzling sound with her lips, she started complaining of pains, said she could not sit, said I had torn something inside her. The sweat rolled down my neck, and we almost ran over some little animal or other that was crossing the road with tail erect, and again my vile-tempered companion called me an ugly name. When we stopped at the filling station, she scrambled out without a word and was a long time away. Slowly, lovingly, an elderly friend with a broken nose wiped my windshield. They do it differently at every place, from chamois cloth to soapy brush. This fellow used a pink sponge. She appeared at last. Look, she said in that neutral voice that hurt me so, give me some dimes and nickels. I want to call Mother in that hospital. What's the number? Get in, I said. You can't call that number. Why? Get in and slam the door. She got in and slammed the door. The old garage man beamed at her. I swung on to the highway. Why can't I call my mother if I want to? Because, I answered, your mother is dead. 33. In the gay town of Leppingville I bought her 4 books of comics, a box of candy, a box of sanitary pads, 2 Cokes, a manicure set, a travel clock with a luminous dial, a ring with a real topaz, a tennis racket, roller skates with white high shoes, field glasses, a portable radio set, chewing gum, a transparent raincoat, sunglasses, some more garments, swooners, shorts, all kinds of summer frocks. At the hotel we had separate rooms, but in the middle of the night she came sobbing into mine, and we made it up very gently. You see, she had absolutely nowhere else to go,